The association, of the foundation, Mrs. Jank Knapp, who's the chair of the board, Dr. Erler, the Lord Mayor of Freiburg, and the people responsible for keeping foundations going, which is not something we have in Jerusalem. Professor Falk, of course, for his very kind words. For Mr. Wilhelm Willi, who's been my host here in Freiburg, and of course to Bishop Capio, whose work is very much a part of our civil society resistance against injustice. Like I said, it's very moving, partly because I couldn't imagine the mayor of Jerusalem or a member of the present Israeli government congratulating human rights workers. It's just something inconceivable in our world that would happen. But, you know, the world of political activism is very different from that of academia, although it would be nice if there was a little more integration between the two. When we're considering the relevance of Kant for our work in shepherding in a more just and peaceful world, the issue isn't whether his concepts, arguments, or proposals are relevant or not, which is the preoccupation of academic circles, but whether they contribute to analyses that can be applied to new situations, including political ones. In this light, Kant's work, and of course, especially for our purposes here, his treatise, Perpetual Peace, can be very useful as a guide for us. Among many other things, Kant identifies two major issues of prime importance today, issues with which those of us striving for a just peace in Israel and Palestine struggle with daily. First, how to get the states to accept their responsibility to pursue justice and oppose injustice. And secondly, how to mobilize civil society in the cause of justice. Now, in my experience as a civil society activist for almost a half a century already, us 60s flower children are getting a little older. In my experience, states, although they possess responsibility and authority in the modern world system, will not do the right thing if left to their own devices. Even in clear-cut cases where world peace is threatened or injustice affects millions of people, governments will find pretexts for pursuing some political agenda, a concoction of domestic and international political interests that have nothing to do with the well-being of either their own citizens or of the global community. The fact that Israel ignores and is allowed by its fellow states to ignore human rights, international law, and dozens of UN resolutions in its 43-year occupation speaks volumes about the failures of governments, in this case Germany and the US at the head, to carry out their obligations. I don't know if you know, but the wall that Israel has built with no public, that was condemned by the International Court of Justice, but with no implementation of that, and the UN, unanimously, including Germany voting that the wall was illegal and should be demolished, the world has done nothing to demolish it or to end that project. Do you know the wall that Israel is building against the Palestinians is twice as high as the Berlin Wall was? The Berlin Wall was 4 meters high. The Israeli wall is 8 meters high. It's 5 times longer than the Berlin Wall was, and the Berlin Wall was linear. The Israeli wall encircles, imprisons tens of thousands of Palestinians in their own homes and neighborhoods and villages. And if I, last August, had to risk my life to take an old fishing boat from Cyprus to Gaza, defying the Israeli Navy in order to break the cruel and illegal 2-year siege imposed on an already impoverished and traumatized civilian population, it was only because governments, whose job it is to uphold international law and ensure a peaceful world order, abrogated their responsibility. Our perilous voyage represented what's been called the politics of shame, which is an instrument that at least the people have, trying to shame governments into doing their job. Kant sets out a workable structure for perpetual peace that in fact contains many of the elements of the present world system. Free states with republican constitutions as an ideal held by many, and in many places it's an actual political reality. A federation of sovereign states and the primacy of international law. Still lacking in Kant's rational order, however, is good faith on the part of states, something which must be imposed on them by their citizens organized into a civil society. Now, the irresponsibility of states is nowhere more evident than in the Israel-Palestine conflict, which should have been resolved 60 years ago, saving tens of thousands of lives and homes while avoiding much of the current strife and polarization that characterizes Muslim Western relations and which has resulted in the high degree of insecurity felt by everyone globally. So the axiom I just suggested, that states will not do the right thing, has a proviso. And that is, they will not do the right thing unless they are prodded, pushed, and ultimately forced to do so by the people. So then the question is, how do we get the people to push, and in the right direction? Civil society, after all, is not always progressive. Quite the contrary, if you look at the governments that the people, civil society, elect. Israel's a prime example. 1948 represents our year of independence. Never mind that it also marks the Nakba, a catastrophe for the Palestinian people in which more than 700,000 who did not take part of the fighting, some half of the Palestinian population, were driven from their homes, which were subsequently demolished. That's seen by Israeli Jews, by Israeli civil society, as a good thing. And that only 3 years after the Holocaust. Witness how an ongoing occupation of more than 4 decades can be reduced to a non-issue in Israel. We don't even talk about it. We don't even use the word occupation or Palestinian in Israel. People no less than governments, it turns out, have the ability to look injustice in the eye and still deny it, or minimize it, or justify it, or even manage not to see it at all. This ability to look at injustice and not see it is reminiscent of Ralph Ellison's evocative description of how black people in America are rendered invisible. He writes, in the voice of this black protagonist in his book, Invisible Man, "I am an invisible man. Invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. It's as though I've been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or fragments of their imagination.